His wife here wants to watch. Thanks.
Done. There you go.
All right, she's getting on.
Okay.
All right, no, she's getting on. So whenever.
All right, perfect. Just want to welcome everyone this evening. It's so good to see everyone and like to welcome Dr. Peter Haas. I'm going to do a little introduction this evening. This is the first session in our lifelong learning series with our very esteemed as scholar in residence, Dr. Peter Haas, called Israel Beyond the Headlines. And just a little bit about Peter for those of you who have not had an opportunity to meet him. He is both an esteemed educator and rabbi. He attended HUC in Cincinnati and was ordained as a Reform rabbi in 1974. Additionally, he was active in the U.S. Army as a chaplain for more than 3 years and remained in the National Guard chaplain corps for another 19 years. And upon completion of his active duty, he enrolled in a graduate program, earned a PhD from Brown University in Jewish Studies, and then joined the faculty at Vanderbilt University, where he taught Jewish ethics, Holocaust, and Western religion and Middle Eastern conflict. And beginning in 2000, he moved to Case Western Reserve University and was appointed chair of the Department of Religious Studies in 2003, where he has also served as a visiting professor at is it called the Spertus Institute of Jewish Studies in Chicago. You are also an author of several books and articles dealing with moral discourse, Jewish and Christian thought, and has taught a number of classes in Middle Eastern studies and in Israel. And I know and I am leaving something out, Julie, and you've been involved in, and I can't remember the name of the group. It's the Palestine, is it something for
Scholars
peace?
for Peace in the Middle East.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
So we are honored to have you this evening. And Peter, we will let you take over.
All right, well, good evening and thanks for joining us. So the idea of this course, as we kind of talked about it, was we're calling it the Middle East Update or Israel Update. The idea being, rather than doing something systematic month after month after month, and that's a long period of time, we trusted there would always be something going on with Israel, and that we could always look at what happened to be happening that week or around that time, and just talk about it in more depth. We've had 3 good topics kind of go by in the last 2 months, but there'll always be something going on. So we figured we'll always find something to talk about and discuss and sort of see what's going on in terms of the Middle East. So, but what I thought I would do tonight as a sort of start off is just talk about the Middle East in general. And the reason I wanted to do that, and I know this is going to sound silly, but people forget, Israel is a Middle Eastern country. And I don't mean that only geographically, it's kind of located in the Middle East, but it acts like a Middle East country. It thinks like a Middle East country. It interrelates with other Middle East countries in Middle East sorts of ways. So it really helps to understand the Middle East as another angle on understanding Israel. It's not just American Jewish, immigrants, Olim. It's really a Middle Eastern country, very much religiously, culturally, and everything else, and is becoming more so. So I thought it would be interesting just to do a very broad overview of the Middle East. So I will do that. This map I'm showing you here, you may not think is the Middle East, and you would be right in some ways. I always used to tease my undergraduates, like, where's the Middle East? And what's it in the middle of? So you say Far East, you think, I don't know, Japan or Korea or something. And Near East, like, what's it near? and then people usually come out with Algeria or Morocco, which from the European point of view, of course, is not east, it's south. So it's a bit of a confusion of to even where the Middle East is, and we're going to come back to that in just a few minutes. But just to start making things complicated right off the bat. So there are 4 topics I want to talk about in the next sort of 20 minutes, next 40 minutes, 30, whatever, however much time we have, 40 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about the geography, talk about ethnicity. The Middle East is anything but homogeneous. It is a variety of ethnicities. So we need to kind of get a handle on that. And of course, that's true of Israel as well, but it's not only true of Israel. We need to talk about the religious diversity and what that means. And then we have to talk about models of leadership, and that gets into the modern period and how these countries came into being to begin with and are trying to, how should I say this, exercise leadership over the religious, ethnic, and geographical complexities that they've inherited. And everything I will say from now on about the Middle East is going to be true in its own way in terms of Israel. And I think that just is a good background for understanding the country. So we'll start off with geography. And if you have questions or comments, whatever, just, I'm not always looking at the screens. You might have to just yell out or put something in chat and somebody will have to notice it. But feel free to do that. That's not a problem for me. And if I don't hear interruptions, I'm just going to keep going. So let's start off with geography. So this is kind of the Middle East. I don't know if your own minds, you think of Afghanistan as the Middle East. It's kind of too far east. I think of it more like Pakistan and India. But Afghanistan is Middle Eastern in some ways. It's less Middle Eastern in other ways. We all think, I think that Iran is the Middle East. I think technically Middle East would be Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Israel, Lebanon, and the Far East would, that's the Middle East. The Far East would start with Iran, Afghanistan, and so forth. And the Near East, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. What else is out there? Libya. But you know, there's no real agreed upon where the Middle East begins and ends. And this, by the way, is a problem for all these countries because they all are aware that they're embedded in the region, but they're not sure who else is in the region. Is Turkey in the region or not? I mean, Turkey is not even sure. It thinks every other year it thinks it's in Europe, right? So when Israel talks about, its role in the Middle East, is it talking about Iran? Is it talking about Afghanistan? Did Afghanistan or withdrawal from Afghanistan even make a difference in the Middle East? These are all these kind of questions that academics love. By the way, you might remember when the Abraham Accords were signed, they were originally 4 Middle Eastern countries. I don't know if you remember what they were, but they were the Emirates, Bahrain, and Sudan. Now, do you think of Sudan as the Middle East, or do you think of it as North Africa, or even kind of Sahel, the Southern Africa? What do you call it? Under the desert. So, but Sudan is somehow honorarily a part of the Middle East. I'm not quite sure why, but there it is. So, in a sense, what happened in Afghanistan and what is happening in Sudan with the rebellion going on is really part of what's going on in the Middle East, if you have a broad view of the Middle East. The ancient Near East, so that's that. This is the big Middle East, if you want to draw the really broad lines. So you include Libya and Tunisia and Algeria and Morocco. And you go all the way through Afghanistan and maybe Pakistan. or what used to be called Western Pakistan, before East Pakistan broke away and became Bangladesh. But if you include this, you've got a lot more countries, a lot more ethnicities, a lot more religions, and just a lot more going on than if you think the Middle East is Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. So just to keep in mind when we say Middle East, which countries should we be talking about, and which ones should we not be talking about? Should we be including Morocco but not including Sudan? Should we include Iran but not Afghanistan? Should we include Afghanistan but not Iran? What about Turkey? Because, like I say, that's European every now and then. So just raise the question of where is the Middle East? Okay, now comes the more confusing part about the ethnicity, the actual people who live there. Oh, I have the ancient Near East topography. This is the ancient Near East, also known as the ancient Near East. So it's really the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, that run through what is now Iraq and into southern Turkey. And then the coastal strip, which you can see here where it says Syria. It actually starts up here at Karkar, or actually starts up here at Carchemish, a site of many ancient battles, and then down this way along the coast into the Sinai and over to Egypt. This was the land bridge right here. So trade went up the rivers to Carchemish, down this way, which, by the way, was not far from where Abraham was when Haran, then down along the coastline to the big port cities, Shem, bypassing Jerusalem, which is in the mountains, and then over to Egypt, and then North Africa, or down into Africa if you follow the Nile. So this area in here where it says Arabian Desert is basically the Arabian Desert. So there's very little travel back and forth east-west. It's all north and then around the Fertile Crescent. So that's how the region is put together, and it is still how it is put together. So where you sit on this sort of Fertile Crescent makes a big difference. Israel, of course, sits right here around Shem and Jerusalem and Beersheba. It's right in the middle of the land bridge. If you go south, you end up in Egypt. If you go north, you end up in Syria and Assyria and eventually Babylon, or maybe the Hittites. Israel has always been the crossroads. It has always been the trade routes in both the good sense and the bad sense. And it has always been an extreme mixture of people, simply because of where it's located. And despite all the Zionist history and so forth, that has not changed. It is a big melting pot in some ways, but not entirely uniquely, according to the Middle East. Is this all clear? Because I want to go into the ethnicities, which things will stop becoming clear. So ethnicities. Here are the empires, so I can't read my own notes. But again, here's Israel, Egypt, Babylonia, the Hittites. So ethnicities. If you look at just the labels here, you'll get a beginning of a sense of the problem. You've got Egypt, you've got the Gulf states, Iran, Iraq, Oman, Morocco, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Tunisia, Turkey, Yemen. These are all different ethnic groups. We're going to talk about, maybe the bigger problem here is, what is an Arab? And is there actually anything like an Arab? And this is an extremely complicated question, because if you ask any of the people in this picture, they're as likely as not to say, oh, I'm Iraqi or I'm Moroccan. The notion of an Arab identity is something that gets pasted on top. And we can talk more about that. I've got some anecdotes about that. I've got lots of anecdotes. So one problem, and we spent a lot of time in my undergraduate classes, what is an Arab anyway? If you look at these people and you look at the map, you see we're dealing with huge geographical area with very different geographical features, meaning different agricultural products, meaning different trade routes, meaning different economies, meaning different isolated tribes and groups and peoples and customs and costumes that do not mingle easily. So when in the modern world the concept of the Arab came up, it was trying to create a super nationality, if I can say that, on top of what was an extremely diverse and contentious group. It was a way of trying to pretend like there was a kind of unity. So what makes you an Arab? I almost put the definition down. There's actually a definition put together by the Arab League. And the Arab League's definition, and I'm going to oversimplify it, but it's basically this. If you speak Arabic and you identify with the Arabic people. In other words, you're Arabic if you feel like you're Arabic, and if you don't speak Arabic, then you're maybe not really an Arab. So it's kind of that kind of problem. I should also tell you at this point that Arabic, despite Arabs being those who speak Arabic, Arabic is not a mutually understandable language throughout this region. Arabic is spoken in multiple dialects. Many of them are mutually unintelligible. Syrians cannot understand Egyptians, for example. So there's the Gulf states, everybody makes fun of them because they speak Arabic funny. But especially in a lot of towns, isolated areas, people speak in Arabic that nobody else understands. What is common is literary Arabic, which is roughly Quranic Arabic. So newspapers can be common, magazines can be common. For the educated groups, television, radio shows can be common. But out in the backwoods, there's no common language either. So this is another kind of dividing thing. So this may help explain why you can have Arab Muslims and Arab Christians, but Jews are Jews, right? You have Arab Muslims, Arab Christians, Israeli Jews. Do you have Arab Jews? Well, yes, you do, but that's sort of not one of the categories. Okay, what I want to show you next is a couple of maps of different countries in the Middle East, so you can see the internal ethnic diversity. Hold on to your hats. So this is Iran. So the Islamic Republic of Iran. We all think of it as Shia Persian. It is not. And one of its problems is that there are a lot of non-Shia, non-Persians in Shia Persia. The Persians are probably the biggest group. That's the sort of red blobs around here. This is the Persian. You've got large groups, as you can see, of Azeris. That's the dark green, which do not regard themselves as Persians. You can see you've got Lors, you've got Hazaras. Hazaras are over here near Afghanistan. They're a tribe that's also very common in Afghanistan, probably originally Mongols. And I can tell you why I think that, but they are Hazaras that are settled in this whole area, especially in Afghanistan, but this border is somewhat artificial, as every other border. You can see areas of groups you've never heard of, the Gilaks, the Turkmens, which you see in a few places, probably leftover Turkish soldiers, or Sharis and so forth. The point is that Iran has a lot of now ethnic tensions because the Iranian economy is not doing so well, partly because of the sanctions that were put on by the Trump administration and are still in place under Biden, but they were having economic problems to begin with. The other side of that, we may talk more about Iran if something happens, is it is a more or less Western industrialized country. So it is somewhat able to overcome the sanctions, the economic sanctions. But just to show you, Iran is very complicated and not at all a unified ethnic or religious country. Okay, so let's move on to Syria. So here's Syria. The white part is basically uninhabited. Arabs are the yellow part. I should tell you that in Syria and well, especially in Syria, the word Arab originally meant Bedouin. So if you ask somebody from Aleppo, up here, kind of in the north, what is your identity? They would say Halabi. I'm in Aleppo. Are you an Arab? No, I don't ride camels and raid villages. I'm an urban Halabi. So Arab was was not a complimentary term. It was a dismissive term. So when you adopt Arab nowadays, it has this sort of funny double meaning. It's where the Arabs who are rising again, but Arabs have this kind of questionable background. So as you can see here, the yellow part is Arab, which would have been the old Bedouin areas, the roamers, the raiders, and so forth. The green parts, especially up in the north, you can see my cursor, right? This kind of, the cursor up here and up here and up here. And as well as, I shouldn't say though, these are Kurds up here in the north. We can talk more about the Kurds. These are the Alawis. I have to say a word about what the Alawis and what happened to them. So when the British, it was the French, decided to create the country Syria, this would have been after World War I. This was the French mandate, which they held on to really to World War II, along with the British who held Jordan and Israel further south. When they created Syria, they ignored that there were Kurds there. They ignored that there were any of these other people there. But the British were afraid that if they gave the army and the police to the Sunni Arabs, that's the yellow, that the Sunni Arabs would simply beat everybody else up, which may have been true. I'll give the British that. So the British decided that even though the Arab Sunnis, the yellow, were majority, they would give the army and the police to the Alawi minority. That's the part here around Tartus and Latakia, figuring that they wouldn't be strong enough to beat the Sunni Arabs, but they would be strong enough to defend themselves. What has happened is that the Alawis aren't quite Sunni. The Alawis took over all of Syria and beat up everybody else. The current civil war, the leader of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, is an Alawi. He's from Latakia. So he's beating up the Arabs, the Sunnis. He's also trying to beat up the Kurds further north. And he's beating up all these other ethnic groups, including the Druze, which are further south, and the Christians, which are over near Lebanon. So the British and the French played this kind of game of playing one ethnic group off against the other when they made these countries, and that has been an ongoing problem. At this time, when Turkey was created right after World War I in the 1920s, there were large Kurdish populations in Turkey, and as you can see, the border runs through Turkey. So there's Kurds up here, but there are also Kurds on the Syrian side. The Syrians don't trust them because they're allied to the Turkish Kurds. The Turkish Kurds don't trust them because they're allied to the Syrian Kurds. Just saying. So these things get confusing very quickly. So that's Syria. So here's Iraq. Again, you've got a huge northern Kurdish population. We'll probably come back to this, but the Kurds have created a sort of semi-independent country, which they like to call Kurdistan. They want to do what the Jews did. The Jews get a homeland, we want a homeland, And the Israelis have been fairly, what do I want to say, open to the idea. The Kurdish region is the one part that's really not in complete political or economic turmoil right now. But the Sunni Arabs in this sort of, I don't know what color is it, flesh color over here or peach color, and the Shias down here, and the Sunnis in the middle. Really what the British did, and this was British mandate, is they threw the Kurdish region, the Sunni region, and the Shia region together so that in any internal conflict, the Sunni Kurds and Arabs could defend themselves against the Shias. The Shia Arabs and the Sunni Arabs could defend themselves against the Kurds. I mean, you know, everybody could gang up against everybody else, which has led to a lot of interesting stalemates. The Jews were in here too, by the way. They were urban dwellers here and in Syria and in Lebanon, which is why Jews were never considered Arab. They never lived outside the cities. They were urban. Everybody still with me? Okay, so let me go to Lebanon and then we'll talk about Israel a little bit. And then I'll show you what the Middle East should look like. So if you wonder why Lebanon is falling apart, this is why. The red here is Maronite Christians. The French, when they created Lebanon, literally, when they created Lebanon out of Syria, they carved off the western part as a Christian state. Imagine in your mind, there could have been a Jewish state, a Christian state, a Kurdish state, and a Muslim state. Didn't happen, but theoretically it would have been kind of possible. So these are the Maronite Christians. Keep that in mind. They're not the majority, but well, they used to be a plurality. That's kind of changed. You have Shia Muslims down here, currently allied with Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran. There's also Shia up here, but this is the big Shia area where Hezbollah is. You have Sunnis scattered here, that's the green, but Sunnis by today are clearly a minority. When this was set up, it was more 1/3 Sunni, 1/3 Shia, 1/3 Maronite Christian. There are other kinds of Christian groups I can call out right here. The Greek Catholic, which around the city of Zahra. There are a few other bits and pieces, but basically Lebanon is just bunches of different ethnic groups with their own territorial homelands, which they have been in for 2,000 years or more. So you get a sense that the Middle East is complicated here. Wanted to show you some picture of Israeli tribes, even though we kind of figure all Israelis moved there, 70 years ago. So you have ultra-Orthodox, you have Ethiopian, you have these kind of secular Mizrahi Jews doing yoga. This is an Arab Israeli beauty queen, the former Shas rabbi, a Maronite Christian from the old city, and just, some secular dude. So you've got this entire mixture of people. Many of you have been in Israel and you know what a mixture of people is. So in that regard, Israel is in many ways replicating what's already going on in the Middle East. And to some extent, different Israeli groups are moving to different areas of the country. So there's some kind of ethnic differences. It's not as extreme as elsewhere, but you can see it. Some of you may have heard the saying that Jews live in Jerusalem, Israelis live in Tel Aviv. A lot of Arabs in the north, especially in Haifa. You go into the south, In some of the development towns, it's largely from the Mizrahi community. If you go into the middle of the Negev, it's Bedouin. If you go way up north, it's Druze. There's also up north, there's a Circassian village. These are old Turkish soldiers that got settled there, and they're still there, and they're still Circassian. So you have these kind of ethnic groups all over Israel as well. And this is very common in the Middle East. And ethnic tensions do break out in Israel between Mizrahi and Sephardi, Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, not as much anymore. Sometimes with Ethiopians, sometimes the Druze get into an issue, sometimes Israeli Arabs, sometimes, especially nowadays, the Bedouin for various reasons. So you have these kind of ethnic flare-ups that the Israelis try to deal with. So I've got a map that tells you what the Middle East should look like, and then we'll take a break for a second here. But if you look at this, you've got Sunni Iraq, Shia, an Arab Shia state, Free Kurdistan, Turkey, of course, Greater Jordan, which includes most of southern Damascus, because this is all Arab. Jordan is not urban, it's rural. Syria is just the cities. So you've got all of these different kinds of ethnic communities that are going on. So, and Afghanistan is only part of its size. Pakistan is a whole different world. Free Baluchistan, which is an ethnic group which is trying to break away, which is spread across Afghanistan and Pakistan. Yemen should be much bigger, and including more of Saudi Arabia. It kind of goes on and on. Okay, so I want to get to religion, but let me see if there are any comments or questions here. I have to tell you a great anecdote. This was probably 25 years ago. I was in Israel for a World Conference of Jewish Studies conference. And I had decided to go a couple days early and go over to Egypt, just because I wanted to sort of confront Egypt. That was a whole experience in itself. So anyway, I'm coming back. It's an unmarked airplanes. We're leaving from the old Cairo terminal, an unmarked planes, and it's heavy security. And somehow on board or in the waiting room, I run into a couple from South Africa. They're Afrikaners, and he's a New Testament scholar. So he's going to this conference. She's the tag-along spouse. I mean, these are really Afrikaners. So they're completely lost. They had flown in from Johannesburg, and changing planes in Cairo. So when we got to, and we were leaving at midnight, we get to Lod at 1:30 in the morning. And I kind of take them under my wings, and we organize a Sheirut, and we turn out to stay at the same hotel. So we go to the same little hotel in Jerusalem, and the whole way, and again, this is 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, she is saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry it's dark. Oh, I want to see the biblical land. Oh, I've read about this land all my life. I want to see Israel. I want to see these holy places. It's dark. I don't see anything." I was so glad when we got to the hotel. I mean, she just complained the whole way. So the conference goes on. I never run into her again. I see the husband every now and then somewhere in some conference room. Turns out we're coming down the elevator together the last day of the conference, and she's got her suitcase and everything. And so I say, "Oh, Miss Afrikaner, how did you like Israel now that you got to see it?" And she said, "Oh, I hated it. I hate it. I can't wait to get out of here. I just have to get out of here." I said, "Really? Why? What happened?" She said, "The racial mixing." So I thought that was a very cute story. I don't know what she expected, but if you're in Jerusalem, there's a lot of racial mixing. Okay, any other questions, or should we go on to the religion? Going on to the religion. So you can see there's going to be a lot of different religions. So let me say a little bit about the birth of Islam and Sunni and Shia and Sufi, and maybe a little bit about Druze. So Islam begins in the Saudi Peninsula. Saudi Arabia always considers itself the birthplace of Islam. It started in the city of Mecca, which is the big red dot. Eventually, Muhammad fled up to Medina. I know they should pronounce it Medina, but they don't. And this was the first Muslim city. And after that, Islam had a couple of battles with Mecca and then spread throughout the peninsula up into what is here labeled Jordan and Syria and Iraq. But at that point, it was the Byzantine Empire. It was the Eastern Christian Empire, which fell very rapidly. I just need to point this out. This is the genealogy of Muhammad. You see he's over here. He's raised by his uncle Abu Talib, because he was an orphan. He's the Quraysh tribe and the Hashemi clan. And if Hashemi sounds familiar to you, like the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, that's why. They're claiming to be of the clan of Muhammad. That gives them legitimacy. So the Quraysh tribe, the Hashemi clan, is his father who dies, and he's raised by Abu Talib. He has a couple of daughters, 3 daughters. Fatima marries a cousin, Ali, and Ali has 2 sons, Hassan and Hussein, who become the leaders of Shia Islam and are martyred. So there's a very tense relationship ever since between the followers of Muhammad and the followers of Hassan and Hussein, Sunnis and Shias. They have some real issues about leadership and everything else. So one of the stories of Muhammad is he eventually goes up to heaven and he leads all other holy people, meaning Christians and Jews, people of the book. He leads them in prayer. He's the Imam. And this is a symbol that the true monotheistic religions given to Christians and to Jews was spoiled by them. It was garbled or forgotten or in some way contaminated. And so it comes down again to Muhammad, and he becomes the true monotheist who now is able to lead Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Ishmael, Moses, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, everybody in prayer. And they're all out here somewhere praying. You can see the guy with the Christian cross, and you can see various headgear. They have flames, meaning that they're holy. That's the halo. And Muhammad's out in front, not only with the biggest flame, but no face, because you never worship Muhammad. This is just an art convention. But he's claiming supremacy over all people of the book. People of the book meaning gotten the same revelation, but only Muslims have it straight. There were 4 imams who followed him. One was selected by veteran Muslims. That they didn't like that, so they nominated Abu Bakr. He was assassinated, so there was already internal dissension within 10 years of Muhammad's death. He was followed by Uthman, who put together the Quran. He was killed in a rebellion. And then Ali was proclaimed. There was a rebellion, and this is where we get the Sunni Shia split. Muhammad died in 631. So by 661, we have two massive Muslim empires in 30 years. I mean, the speed is incredible. So I'm just going to show you the Imams in Shia Islam. You have the same 4, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali. Then here come the Umayyads, and this is all of the leaders of the Sunnis, really down to the Turks. And here's the 12 leaders of the Shias, down to Muhammad al-Mahdi, who never died, but went up into heaven and is coming back down. And Khomeini in Iran, which is a Shia, is claiming to be him. So if you can claim to be the returned Muhammad al-Mahdi, then you are of the level of Hassan and Hussein and Ali and Muhammad himself. So this is a big claim on the part of the Shia. The Sunnis do not claim this. The Sunnis just have I'm going to say secular, but they have just religious leaders. They do not have the kind of imams and ayatollahs and these more messianic figures that you get in Shia Islam. So this is also a problem for Shias who live in Sunni majority countries and vice versa. So here is the split of Islam. I don't think you can see the dates very clearly, but this is what happened in the 638, 637, 638, 639, 641. So actually this is 10 years after Muhammad's death. The entire peninsula, and this is the purple, is the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, now the Byzantine Empire, largely Christian, Eastern Orthodox. And this pink over here is the Persian Empire. They both fell within years. And if you look back at what happened to Umar in 644, he was assassinated by a Persian. Because the Persians were claiming, we're much more cultivated than you camel riders. We should be the rulers. And instead it's the Arabs. So there's an Arab-Persian thing going on here already. And we're talking about 10 years after Muhammad's death. So here is the extent of the caliphate. So it's pretty impressive, pretty much all of the Middle East. This is Iran, this is Afghanistan, this is Pakistan, West Pakistan, up into the Balkans a little bit. Not Balkans, Anatolia, part of Turkey, and North Africa. So this was a pretty impressive spread of the empire. They were very tolerant towards people of the book, meaning Christians and Jews, which probably helped them. If you were pagan, you had no protections. So Christians and Jews were at least second-class citizens. They had certain rights. You could have synagogues, you could have churches. They could be appointed to certain positions, but if you were a pagan, you just had no status. Need to talk about the Ottomans a little bit. This is the Ottoman Empire, which came next. This is what it looked like at its largest extent. The Ottomans were not Muslim, were not Arab, they were Turks, and they were not Muslim originally, which is why the Ottomans always call their ruler Sultan and not Caliph or Imam or something like that. They used the secular word Sultan because they were not really Muslims. They were not really Arabs. They were not part of Muhammad's family. So the Ottoman Empire ruled this entire region really until World War I. It shrunk considerably, as you can see, but this hard core stayed around until World War I. So the bottom line here as we move on is that all of this area was at one way or another a unified area, ancient Near East, Umayyads, Abbasids, Ottomans, until the British and French created countries. And I just wanted to say a word about the Sufis, which is a more spiritual movement within Islam, almost certainly influenced by Hinduism. It has gurus. They don't call them gurus, but they have gurus. They call them sheikhs. They have yogas, which they call dhikr or something like that. They have groups of people who worship and pray together called ways or orders or tariqah. So they emphasize a spiritual life. They challenge both Sunnis and Shias. They are currently, especially in Saudi Arabia, being heavily persecuted. Also in Iran. Iran because they're not Shia enough, and Saudi Arabia because they're not Sunni enough. But their houses of worship, their mosques, their shrines are being destroyed. ISIS destroyed them. The Sufis are being very much squeezed, even though they're much more spiritual kind of sect. but they're around. And you have Sufis who are Shias, Sufis who are Sunnis, Sufis who are Kurds, Sufis who are Druze, so on. So, my last topic is leadership. And the issue I'm going to leave you with is, if you were the British or the French, and you were dividing this area up into countries, what kind of leadership should there be? Who should lead these groups? And I can tell you there is no consensus now or then or now as what constitutes a leader. I mean, everybody knows what an Imam is. That's a Shia leader. Everybody knows what an Ayatollah is. That's a super Imam. You kind of know what a descendant of Muhammad is. That would be a Sunni leader. You know what an Ottoman Sultan is. He runs the Ottoman government. But what do you do with a secular country? Who runs it? I've told you one answer is the king of Jordan, who claims to be from the clan of Muhammad. He's Hashemite. He's actually from Saudi Arabia. I mean, his family is from Saudi Arabia. But if he can claim he's, the family of Muhammad, that already gives him some, some special points. So the original clan of Muhammad was from the Quraysh tribe. The British instigated an Arab revolt against the Ottomans. And it was the British who created the Arab identity, because they say, you're in this region, but you're not Turks, because before then everybody was an Ottoman. So they're Turks, you are Arabs. So the British created this Arab identity to fight against the Ottomans, who was their enemy in World War I. They chose, the British, Hussein bin Ali from Mecca, from Saudi Arabia, as their king. We're going to create an Arab country. It never really worked. He called himself Caliph, which was the traditional Sunni term for a successor of Muhammad. When Turkey went secular with Kemal Ataturk, he called himself the Caliph. He had 3 sons. They became kings of Syria, got kicked out of Syria. One of them became king of Iraq. One of them became king of Jordan, which is still the Jordan family. They got kind of kicked around because nobody believed that they were really the rulers. So there's still a lot of leadership illegitimacy in the region, as is very clear. The closest you've got is in Iran, where you've got an Ayatollah who's claiming to be the 12th Imam, who says, I'm the leader of the country. And that's hard to argue with. So with the Sykes-Picot Treaty, the British had A, they carved, and B. A is both the light green, the light blue, and the dark blue. They carved out this western part here to create a Christian state. We now call it Lebanon. The British created, in the red zone and the B zone, Iraq, which is Kurds in the north, Sunnis in the middle, and Shias in the south, which didn't get along. And then you had an international zone, which eventually the western part of which Palestine, the western part of which in 1948 became a Jewish state. The Kurdish state is up in here, but never really happened. But if you see Kirkuk and Mosul and Mardin, this is the Kurdish homeland. And of course, this part eventually was ceded to Turkey and became the Republic of Turkey, which is not Arab, it's Turkish. Okay, so a little bit about how the modern Middle East takes shape, and some of the back and forth with the kings, and then the struggles beginning in the 20s of what comes next. And this is where you get the Muslim Brotherhood founded in Egypt, because the Egyptian monarchy was founded by the British also. Lebanon is declared in 1926. You have Arab anti-Jewish riots breaking out in Jerusalem and West Palestine in 29. And this is the period when all of this is kind of supposedly coming together. And I just have to talk about Lebanon for just a second, and then I'll come up for air. So you can see Faisal was overthrown by the French. He became the king of Iraq, of course. France ended up reorganizing Syria into 5 states, mini states, based on religion. This is important. There were 5 religious-based states in what was to become Lebanon. A Christian, that's basically Maronite, Druze, Muslim, there were 2 Muslim, one was Sunni and one was Shia, and Alawi. Eventually, the Alawis became part of Syria and ended up ruling Syria. The other 4 were united to create, the idea was 4 to create modern Syria, the 5th to create Lebanon. What happened is the Alawis and some of the Muslims became Syria, and Lebanon became Christian plus Muslim plus Druze. So Lebanon became very mixed, as you saw in my map. According to the census, the leadership of Lebanon to this day, the president has to be a Maronite, Christian. The prime minister has to be a Sunni, Arab, Muslim, and the speaker has to be a Shia. This is based on the most recent census that was taken in Lebanon in 1933. The parliament, based on that same census, but wanting to give the Christians a majority, is the ratio of Christians in the parliament to Muslims is 6-5. That has not changed. And the minute you try to change it, everybody screams, no, this is the status quo, it has to stay. So Lebanon has broken down into confessional mini-states, which have been at war with each other in one way or another since at least the mid-1970s, which is why Lebanon is now no longer a functioning country. And if you know about the explosion in Beirut, nobody wants the president to be head of the investigation committee because he's going to end up pointing fingers at Sunnis and Shias. And nobody wants the prime minister because he'll point up fingers to Maronites and Shias. And nobody wants a Shia because he'll point fingers at Maronites and Sunnis. So that's kind of Lebanon. So here are the countries. They all have very different ethnicities, religious mixtures, geographies, demographics, economics, histories, and they all relate to each other differently. So I'm going to take this away and tell you, when we try to understand the Middle East, keep all of this in mind because Israel is right in the middle of that, along with everybody else. So we have like 5 minutes if people have comments, thoughts. Did I stun everybody into silence?
Peter, where does the word Arab come from?
Arab is an Arab word, but it really meant the Bedouin. So it was the outsiders, you know, the people on the margins, the ones running around in the desert on the camels. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the etymology is. Generally, that root, I think it's related to the Hebrew Yerbuvia, which means a mixed group, a multitude.
Right, Arab Rav.
Yes. Right. So I think it means just those rabble out there who keep raiding our cities. Yeah, it was a derogatory term until 100 years ago.
Wow. I just wanted to mention, if people are interested in a novelized version of how the lines were drawn, Dreamers of the Day by Mary Doria Russell is a book about this period.
And she's quite a good writer, by the way. She's quite a good writer. It's a difficult story to tell, but she tells it well. Yeah, I think Joel had a question.
More of a statement. I had seen a map of Lebanon with all the various ethnic areas drawn in, had no idea that it was like that in all the other countries in the Middle East too.
Explains a lot, doesn't it?
Wow.
And you can imagine when you have political and economic decline, all these groups become more significant in your life, right?
Wow.
We should talk about this and maybe next time, unless something else happens, about what's going on in Israel and the Bedouin communities and the Arab communities in Israel, which are also falling apart. There's some real issues going on. There's actually some really interesting stories.
So in terms of Arabs, you know, there are a lot of Arabs all over the place. Do any of the Arabs in different countries have any kind of affinity, with each other, or they're just pretty much independent in each state?
They all pay lip service to each other. The minute something happens, let's say to a Palestinian, they'll say, "Oh, our Arab brothers," you know, or Egypt will say, "We will stand by our Arab brothers in Jordan." And so rhetorically, yeah, they're all Arabs. What they do for each other is not that by any measure. So there's no unity. They can barely understand each other because of the different dialects. There is no Arab unity. The Arab League, if you want to see how this works out, really watch the Arab League. You've had 11 years of really brutal civil war in Syria. Arab League has yet to say anything. Oh, well, it's an internal conflict, you know. They are incapable of criticizing anything in the Arab world. They have no voice. I mean, they're really interesting to watch that way. They're totally useless. So there is no outside of the rhetorical level, there's nothing. As a matter of fact, mostly they can't stand each other.
Dr. Haas,
Yeah.
for a long time, I have felt, and I learned this from my late father, Rabbi Herbert Wilner, who is a very intellectual and very pro-Israeli Reform rabbi, that the basis of all of this is these are tribes. That is the ultimate bottom line beyond which nothing else is stronger. You are part of a tribe and your allegiance goes to that tribe. And anyone outside of that tribe is most likely not your friend, to say the least. And these tribal groups have been in existence for hundreds, probably thousands of years. This goes on in the African subcontinent. These tribes do not want to unify. They want to maintain their identity. They have an incredibly strong feeling that their way is the way, and everybody else either join us or probably not, just die. Let us kill you. And
I have two things to say about that.
Yes.
I agree. I mean, I think he's right. But I have a good Lebanese friend, very peaceful kind of guy, who always says, you know what it's like in Lebanon? Me and my brother against my cousin, me and my cousin against everybody else.
yeah.
But it's worse than you say, because it's not only about tribes, it's about clans, it's about families, it's about hamulas.
Yes.
So even within clans, and this is what's going on in Israel right now, but it's very tribal, not in terms of tribes, but in terms of which gang you belong to. And as I say, the more the economies, let's say, of Lebanon crash, the more these groups become your life support. And maybe this should be the topic in the Arab community in Israel. But I mean, Lebanon, you see it just in Technicolor. It's all families, clans, and hamulas and neighborhoods against everybody else, because if you don't get the resource, I mean, if somebody else gets the resource, you don't. Right? So.
A question, it was actually from Robin Shapiro, if I may ask. She wanted to know, how were the Muslims so effective at expanding their geographic footprint, and what religions and cultures were conquered?
Yeah, I saw that in chat and I was going to come back to that. Yeah.
Okay.
So first of all, how they conquered that fast. And again, it was within a generation. It was extremely quick. We have no idea. It was not probably the ease of their alphabet. What we think it was is that they took over the top administrative offices, and Islam just kind of dribbled down over the next really several hundreds of years. So it wasn't like they conquered everybody overnight, but somehow they were able to overthrow the top echelons with their armies, sort of like the Mongols did in some ways, or the Turks, and then it just gradually came down. That's what we think. The groups that were lost, the biggest single group that was lost were the Eastern Orthodox Byzantine Christians, because the Byzantine Empire became Muslim. But it took a long time. It's one of the curiosities when the Crusaders came through, and this is 500 years, 600 years later, when they came through southern Turkey and down Lebanon, slaughtering and killing on their way to Jerusalem. Almost all the people they killed were still Greek Orthodox. So this is, it penetrated the government and then the cities and only gradually out into the countryside, as best as we can tell. Greek Orthodox were the big losers. There are a few little groups left. Indigenous religions, like Zoroastrians, seem to have survived. Of course, Jews did, but they were people of the book. Almost all the indigenous religions of North Africa became Muslimized, and now we're different tribes. The Druze were probably a separate tribe. The Hazaras were probably Mongols. I mean, there are all kinds of interesting things going on. One of the games Middle Easterners play now is to say, I'm not really Arab, I'm something else. I'm Hittite, I'm Phoenician, and so forth. But yeah, we have no idea how quickly it came and what was lost. We just have no idea, except the Byzantine Empire just ceased to exist. Yeah. And was there a second question in chat? Dreams of the Dead, yeah. Okay, well, maybe what we should do is talk about what's going on in Israel in particular, especially, there's a lot going on in the Arab sector right now. As a matter of fact, there was a major budget issue passed on their behalf because of the situation. And we can talk about how it got that way and what's going on and what might be done to resolve it. So unless something else breaks out, maybe that's what we'll do at our next meeting. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. When is our next meeting?
Let me look at my calendar. I believe it's December 16th, Thursday, December 16th at 7:30.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I have too.
Okay.
So if you want, I'll talk about the Arab situation in Israel.